We have a verdict in the Sean Diddy Combs criminal case after all of these weeks. And if you thought that was the only major decision of the day, you would be wrong. We're going to talk about what happened on this absolutely monumental day in court.
Before dawn even broke, the atmosphere outside the courthouse buzzed with tense anticipation, almost tangible in the air. Crowds had already gathered, lining the sidewalks, eager to secure a spot for what many believed would be one of the most unforgettable and dramatic legal battles to unfold in recent memory.
Trafficking of Cassie, not guilty. Sex trafficking of Jane, not guilty. Transportation to engage in prostitution, Cassie, guilty. Transportation to engage in prostitution, Jane, guilty. That was the historic verdict out of the Sean Diddy Combs criminal court today. A split verdict after almost 13 hours of deliberations and weeks of testimony and evidence and arguments. The 12 jurors acquitted Sean Combs of the more severe charges, the ones that carried the stiffest prison sentence, potentially 15 years to life in prison, but convicted him of the Mann Act charges, which, by the way, carry up to 10 years in prison each, although I will tell you in a filing today from the government, it appears the sentencing range they're looking for is 51 to 63 months, so 4 to 5 years. However, there is no mandatory minimum. So would the judge go lower? We'll talk about what the defense is asking for too. And also, whatever the sentences are, would he combine the sentences consecutively, one after another? Maybe, maybe not. A lot of questions, but I'll tell you what, you would think that the verdict would be just the only big part of today. You would think that's the only major decision. Not the case, because we got to talk about what happened later on in the day. The bail hearing. Right after the verdict, it was a question of should Sean Combs be granted release while awaiting sentencing, which the judge set today, by the way. Sort of set the sentencing date. I'll talk more about that as well. But I mean, let's talk about Sean Combs. He's been locked up since September 2024. He's been denied bail at each turn. There was a change of circumstances here. He had just been acquitted of 3 of the charges. So could he make bail? We're going to talk about it. All right, so to discuss the hearing and more, let me bring on once again, hopefully not for the last time, but we're at basically the end of this case until sentencing. Joined once again by Long Crimes in Court reporter Elizabeth Milner. Great to see you. First of all, your reaction to the verdict. Is this what you expected? Because let's really briefly explain what happened yesterday. That, you know, we thought it kind of gave us a preview into what would happen today. Not necessarily so.
Yeah, I was not going to lie, Jesse, a little surprised by the verdict in that I really kind of thought there was a really strong case for count 2, that obviously being sex trafficking as it relates to Cassie Ventura. And that was only because of the questions that the jury was asking when they were bringing some notes back. And that was kind of in relation to what had happened at specific instances that the government point out were allegations of sex trafficking. So I thought because of the tone that was inside the courtroom, the way the family was getting a little bit emotional sitting inside the gallery, even Diddy's demeanor, for the most part, we've seen him kind of really keep up his spirits. But yesterday was really a time where we kind of saw, I think, the weight weighing in on him, that it's possible a conviction on some of the more serious charges were going to happen. And so when the jury came back not guilty on count 1, 2, and 4, you know, I was a little surprised, especially to count 2, but, you know, I do respect the jury's decision. They spent a lot of time listening to this case, listening to all the testimony, listening to all the evidence, and that was the verdict that they had rendered.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised that they found him guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. We have been saying since for weeks on this show that felt like a straightforward path to conviction. Wasn't surprised not guilty with Jane, given some of the gray areas of her testimony, but also the jury didn't even ask for one readback of her testimony or anything to do with her testimony, so it made me think they might have already been decided there. I was surprised about Cassie Ventura sex trafficking just because
it wasn't just reporters and photographers filling the courthouse steps that morning. The crowd was a mix of devoted fans, curious onlookers, former associates, and those simply determined to say they had been there when history unfolded. A long line of news vans stretched nearly the entire block, their brightly branded logos gleaming under the early light, satellite dishes raised like watchful sentinels to the sky. Every few minutes, a reporter would step into frame, delivering a quick, carefully worded update, though everyone knew the real story wouldn't begin until the doors opened and the man at the center of the storm appeared. This was more than just a sentencing. It was the dramatic conclusion to months of hushed rumors, leaked files, tense depositions, and headline-making revelations that had shifted Diddy from an untouchable music mogul to the defendant at the defense table. On this day, that transformation weighed heavily over every conversation and glance, from quiet speculations about the possible sentence to whispered claims of insider knowledge. The atmosphere was thick with expectation, the air almost humming, as if everyone knew they were standing at the edge of a moment that would be remembered for years.
The readback of that testimony, and then shortly thereafter, they came back yesterday and said, we have a verdict on that charge. So I thought they're convinced. And when it came to racketeering, I thought they were still going to be hung because they said they were at an impasse yesterday. It seemed like based on their note, there was no way that would change. The judge told them to continue deliberating. They come back today, and like in an hour, they come back not guilty on racketeering. I'm not really sure what that split ultimately will be. Maybe the jurors will speak out and we'll hear. Got to ask you about Diddy's reaction. Okay, so we have courtroom sketches of what it looked like. You were in there. What was his reaction to the verdict?
Oh, he was very pleased with the verdict. Obviously, I think for the defense and the defendant, that being Sean Combs, I think obviously they would have wanted an acquittal on all the charges. But I think given that they weren't a conviction on the more serious charges of RICO conspiracy and sex trafficking as it relates to Cassie in one charge and Jane in another charge, I think overall Combs was very, very pleased with the jury, to the point where I saw him kind of mouth a little thank you to the jurors as they were still sitting kind of in the jury box, as they were kind of leaving for the end of their day. Obviously, we still have some more matters to address for our end. But in terms of just his reaction, even his family's reaction, Jesse, I think they were so happy knowing that there's such a strong possibility that their father will come home. Obviously, if he would have been convicted on the more serious charges, that might have been a different discussion. But given that he was only convicted on count 3 and 5, that being the Mann Act, it seems like given that it comes with a lesser penalty and sentencing, I think the family is like, yes, our father is coming home, our loved one is coming home, and we hope to see him very, very soon.
And talk about a reaction. Outside that courthouse, my gosh, what has been going on out there? There's what, verbal disputes, people spraying things. Just give us a brief summary of what you've witnessed outside that courthouse after the verdict.
I witnessed a lot, Jesse. A lot was going on. There was kind of, I will even say, pandemonium after the verdict was read. And outside, a lot of Diddy supporters, a lot of people who are kind of with the Free Diddy, I wouldn't say movement, but I guess, they believed in his innocence. They were very pleased, even thinking that it was a possibility he'd just walk outside of that courthouse at some point. But it was a lot of commotion. I did see some people getting to some heated debates, especially in relation to Cassie. I saw some people getting very upset because they believed that the government was trying to take a good man down who did a lot for the culture. Those types of conversations were being had from a lot of people in the public. I even saw some kind of weirder things, and that being people squirting baby oil on themselves. And one of the reporters even got some on her shirt by one of the people who were kind of over in that area. And so a lot was going on, to the point that I think the courthouse police were just kind of like, okay, we need everybody to calm down. They have barricades going all the way down the street. I think in the event that Sean Combs would have walked out of that courthouse, it would have just been straight chaos, I think, outside. But for the most part, especially with that not happening around that time frame, that a lot of people, especially his supporters, were very pleased. And obviously for some, they were a little disappointed with the verdict, but for most that we could see here at the courthouse, a lot seemed pleased by today's decision.
So, Elizabeth, let's talk about what happened next, because right after the verdict, it goes into the idea of, can he be released on bail? Okay, and the judge set a hearing for 5 p.m. So later on today, you literally at the time of this recording just got out of there. Remember, from a legal point of view, the burden is on the defense.
The atmosphere shifted instantly when the black SUVs rolled up to the courthouse, cutting through the buzz of speculation like a blade. Conversations died midword, and a wall of cameras rose, their shutters firing in perfect rhythm. From the lead SUV, Diddy emerged alongside his legal team, his presence sharp against the courthouse's dull stone. His tailored suit fit flawlessly, exuding the precision of a man who once controlled an empire, while the glint of his gold watch caught the morning light, a silent nod to his past success now hanging by a thread. His expression was calm but taut, lips pressed in a thin line, eyes locked on the courthouse doors. He didn't spare a glance for the crowd or answer the rapid-fire questions hurled from behind barricades. Inside, the scene transformed from outside chaos to an almost suffocating stillness. Every seat was taken, the gallery thick with observers leaning forward, eager to witness history. The air was heavy with unspoken questions, each one amplifying the tension, as if everyone in the room could feel that whatever unfolded here would be remembered for years.
Being 51 to 63 months. Now, this is before a pre-sentencing investigation and report. Now, the defense, right, they want 21 months. He's already served almost 10. Talk to us about what you're thinking here, because there is no minimum. The maximum's 10. If the judge were to combine it together, like you said, 20 years, feels highly unlikely that would happen. As we're talking, what is a pre-sentencing report investigation? How would it affect this? What do you think the judge is going to do? There's so many different factors to consider here, and it's not like a murder case when it's like, okay, we know what's going to happen. It's like life in prison without the possibility of parole. It's a given. There's room here. What do you think the judge is going to do?
So in federal court, this is actually very interesting. They rely very heavily on those pre-sentencing investigations. So essentially what will happen is there'll be a federal probation officer, and they do these for almost every case, where they will do their own investigation, where they'll talk to family members, they'll talk to employers, they'll talk to neighbors, and they will make a recommendation to the court as to suitability for release, suitability for time. And that's something that federal judges traditionally really adhere to. They tend to put a lot of weight on those, far more than they do in state court. The probation department can make a recommendation, but the DA will certainly have more ability, most of the time, to talk a judge in or out of a sentencing recommendation from the probation department. Federal court is different. They really put a lot of weight on those. So that's something that I think is going to be very interesting. And a lot of that will come down to what the individuals involved in that investigation, even though it shouldn't impact their professional recommendation. It's really, I think we're going to see what they thought of the case. Did they think he got away with something horrific here? Did they think that he was getting railroaded from the beginning? I think that may reflect in the recommendation to the court, but of course we don't know what that is yet. I don't know. If I'm his defense lawyer, I don't know if I am pressing the gas on that, trying to make this thing go faster. I mean, it's coming up soon enough anyway. I would want to give them the time and not press them, because you don't want a probation officer or anybody in the federal system to feel like they're being rushed.
Right.
Because I think it's very easy to just go, okay, screw it, the guy should stay in.
The prosecution made the point yesterday. They said the point, like, we're not ready to give a really sentencing recommendation. We haven't gotten the report. There's people say, well, maybe he'll get time served, right? He's been locked up. There's other people say, no, the judge is going to throw the book at him. Even though the judge said yesterday, even though I'm denying him bail and I'm looking at certain conditions, this is not reflective or a preview of what my sentencing recommendation or what my sentence will be. But, are we looking at double digits? Are we looking, you think, at 1 to 5 years, time served? I know it's so impossible to ask, but it is a very specific charges he was convicted of.
Yeah, we're not looking at double digits.
Okay.
I cannot imagine the court imposing that. And remember, because this law is so old, and we're in an age of Uber, so literally somebody in New York City, a man or a woman who engages the services of a sex worker who lives in New Jersey, and if they pay for their Uber, that technically is a Mann Act violation. Okay, so it's a morality crime, and that it just does not carry the same weight.
Will the judge say, hey, listen?
The press benches were a hive of quiet focus, journalists with laptops open, screens casting a faint glow on the wooden panels, microphones poised at the table's edge, and pens frozen midair over notepads. Every eye was forward, the air thick with anticipation for the judge's first words. At the defense table, Diddy sat upright, posture rigid, hands resting loosely clasped on the polished surface. His lawyers leaned in with low whispers, sliding documents toward him, but his gaze never wavered from the front. His face was unreadable, betraying nothing, whether he was steeling himself for the inevitable or clinging to the faintest hope of a favorable turn. The sudden call of the bailiff sliced through the silence, ordering the courtroom to rise. The judge entered, black robe flowing as they stepped to the bench. A collective rustle filled the room as everyone stood, then settled back into their seats in unison, the weight of what was about to unfold pressing down on every corner of the chamber.
More than a Band-Aid raid, but rather surgery. Indeed, we are aware of ongoing threats of violence and actual violence in the facility, such that Mr. Combs' safety is constantly at risk. And they go on to argue, though Mr. Combs has been a model inmate for his nearly year-long period of confinement, the violent conditions are still very much a concern for Mr. Combs and is an unnecessary confinement risk given the clear precedent of multiple similarly situated Mann Act convictions where defendants were released on conditions. Now, the government, by the way, would probably disagree with that statement of him being a model inmate. Remember when they accused Combs of trying to arrange three-way phone calls and buying the use of other inmates' phone privileges to try to make sure the government wasn't listening in, that he was having these private conversations, that he was allegedly trying to contact witnesses in the case, that he allegedly orchestrated a birthday campaign to help his public image while he was locked up. So if we hear a government response, I'm sure they're going to say something about that. Then, the defense highlights he's not a risk of flight, he's not a danger to the community, which, by the way, I think are real key points here. But they seem to echo a lot of the same arguments that they have already stated to the court. And remember, they haven't been successful in the past. That he voluntarily came to New York last year to surrender himself to authorities, that he gave up his passport to his attorneys 6 months before his arrest, paid off his mortgage on his Miami home so it was free and clear for him to stay at while out on bond. He was just acquitted of the most serious charges that he was facing, which, by the way, carried decades, if not life in prison. That he's not a risk of flight. That's the basic argument. Now, when it comes to the danger argument, that is key. Why? Judge Subramanian had said after the verdict that the reason he was denying bail was because of Combs' violence, that his own attorneys admitted he was violent during the course of the trial. Well, here is what Combs' defense attorneys argue about that. Quote, the court noted that the defense admitted a history of domestic violence as to Miss Ventura and that he struck Jane twice in June 2024. However, we strenuously object that Mr. Combs poses a danger to the community, aside from a single instance on June 18, 2024, where Mr. Combs was provoked by Jane through her own acts of violence. There was no evidence of any acts of violence in the last 7 years. Indeed, the jury notably rejected the government's argument that the June 2024 incident constituted coercion when it acquitted Mr. Combs of the sex trafficking charge. Also, prior to his arrest in this case, Mr. Combs enrolled in a domestic violence program in which he participated until he was arrested and incarcerated in connection with this case. If released on conditions, Sean Combs will not be violent to anyone. As we said in court, this jury gave him his life back, and he will not squander his second chance at life, nor would he do anything to further jeopardize his 7 children not having a father and 4 of his children not having a parent at all. The court can fashion any set of conditions, and Mr. Combs will abide by any condition to make the court comfortable that Mr. Combs will not be violent toward any person. And that is when they propose the following bail package. That Combs will sign a $50 million bond secured by his home in Miami, that the bond will be co-signed by 3 financially responsible people, that Combs will reside in his home in Miami, that his travel will be limited to the Southern District of Florida, the Southern District of New York for attorney meetings, as well as airports that are necessary to travel between the two, that he will be placed under the express supervision of the U.S. Pretrial Services Agency, that he will report to that agency as directed, that his passport will be surrendered to pretrial services, that he shall not apply for any other passport, and they even highlight that the court can add other conditions too.
The judge began with a calm, methodical review of the case, presenting each detail with precise clarity. The charges were restated, the evidence summarized in a way that left no room for doubt, and the testimonies of witnesses were revisited, each one a critical link in a chain built over weeks in court. Yet, the atmosphere shifted when the review ended and the sentencing began. There was no hesitation, no suspenseful pause, only the firm, measured tone of a decision that seemed inevitable long before the day began. The years of imprisonment were spoken aloud, each number landing like a heavy blow, each word carrying the weight of finality. It was not a symbolic ruling, but a demonstration of the law in its full, uncompromising force, removing any illusion of untouchability he might have carried for decades. For a brief moment, he sat motionless, as though his mind needed to absorb what had just been said. Then tension rippled through him, his jaw tightened, his fists clenched against the polished table, and his voice erupted, sharp and defiant, cutting through the room. "This is wrong. This is a setup." The words were loud enough to bounce off the walls, filled with the raw tone of someone feeling the ground shift beneath them. Gasps and whispers spread through the gallery, a wave of shock and intrigue breaking across the tense silence of the courtroom.
We go on to Cassie, okay? Cassie Ventura Fine. Why, according to prosecutor Slavic, is she a victim of sex trafficking?
Yeah, well, right off the top, when it came to count 2, and that again pertaining to Cassie, the prosecution said, before there was Jane, because they talked about all the points related to Jane, they talked about Cassie afterwards. So she had said before there was Jane, there was Cassie. And so they were really kind of laying out the roadmap as how this sex trafficking pretty much came to be, where it started with early points of their relationship, then it went into the abuse, then it went into the freak-offs, then it went into the end of their relationship. So at the beginning stages of their relationship, Cassie is around 19 years old. She signed to Bad Boy. And so the government's kind of pointing out not only is she dating a significantly older man, but also that this man also happens to be her boss. And so the government was also talking about just the abuse she endured. And I think that's something that they may have on their side, where they have photos, they have video evidence, i.e. the surveillance video from the Intercontinental Hotel, that kind of possibly may work in the government's favor, especially as it pertains to Cassie. And so the government said the defense doesn't deny the abuse, that the defendant just wants to pretty much call it domestic violence. And that's something that a lot of people, even on social media, are saying. They're like, this isn't sex trafficking. This is a domestic violence case. He should have been charged with domestic violence. But according to the government and the way they were laying it out, they're kind of saying, there's a lot of different examples when it comes to sex trafficking and Cassie. And they really kind of talked about the amount of violence examples, really pointing out that the ones they listed in their closing argument were just one of many. So they point to the 2007 incident that happened after a dinner, 2010 after a Princess party, or at Princess party, where Princess security even had to intervene. They talked about 2011, where Sean Combs attacked Cassie after he found out she was sleeping with Kid Cudi. 2013, when Sean Combs attacked Cassie in her apartment when Cassie was with Mia and Deontay. 2013, again that same year, where Sean Combs assaulted Cassie in Jamaica because she was taking too long in the bathroom. 2015, where Sean Combs beat up Cassie at a Las Vegas party, and D-Rock actually ended up crying after seeing Cassie's injuries. And then, of course, the 2016 incident that happened at the Intercontinental Hotel. But the government also pointing out that Sean Combs attacked Cassie's friends too, like Deontay Nash and Bonna and Mia and even Carrie Morgan, all of which had testified to when they were called to testify in this specific trial. But in terms of just kind of using even Dr. Dawn Hughes' testimony to kind of help paint the picture a little bit more in these summations, the question always is, why didn't she leave? And so the government points to Dr. Hughes' testimony about Sean Combs' inner circle kind of helping preventing Cassie from leaving at times. They point to Christina Coram and Rubin and Roger Bonds and even D-Rock, where Christina Coram did all the defendant's bidding. D-Rock was only loyal to the defendant. D-Rock at one point, text messages were shown of D-Rock telling Sean Combs, Cass is calling the studio. She's looking for you. Sean Combs says, time for the ice. What's Cass up to? Does her eye look better? How is she holding up? And then D-Rock responds, well, Rio and Justin saw her. We said that a fight broke out in the club. And again, these are messages that
the tension in the courtroom spiked as his outburst swept through the room, drawing the court officers forward with an unspoken warning. His lawyers leaned in, speaking urgently, hoping to calm him before things spiraled further, but his anger only intensified. He jabbed a finger toward the prosecution, accusing them of twisting facts and working against him, his voice rising with every word. Then his eyes locked on the judge, his speech quickening, tone sharper, almost daring anyone to cut him off. The gavel slammed down with a sharp crack, demanding order, but the sound barely pierced the storm of his frustration. In the press section, reporters typed furiously, capturing every word, every movement, knowing the headlines would explode within the hour. The audience leaned in, captivated by the unguarded display. Gone was the composed public figure they knew. This was raw emotion without a filter. The judge's voice eventually rose above the noise, calm, steady, and resolute, declaring the decision final and the sentence unchanged, regardless of future appeals. The gavel struck once more, its echo marking the close of the proceedings. Court officers stepped in, not merely standing guard now, but ready to escort him out as the air in the room hung thick with the weight of an irreversible judgment.
be out within a year, whereas the government was like, okay, no, under the guidelines, it's really 51 to 61 months. So from the government's point of view, Jesse, it seems like there is kind of a disagreement as to how long the defendant should serve as far as his time goes. But either way, he'll still have time served. And so depending on whether it's 51 to 61 months or like the defense wants 21 to 27 months, it'll ultimately be up to the judge to make that decision.
And didn't the prosecutor say something about a pre-sentencing investigation report? And just to give everybody an idea about what that is, that you got to give the judge as much information as possible before sentencing, and particularly where there's a sentence that's based a lot on the judge's discretion. And that usually consists of, an interview with the defendant, history, background, family, education, employment, criminal history, finances, health, alcohol, drug use. You speak to family members, friends, employers. There's court records that are reviewed and school records and financial records. They look at the offense as well. They speak to law enforcement, victims. What did the prosecution say about a pre-sentencing report? Anything about that?
Yeah, so the prosecution didn't have as long of an argument today, Jesse, as maybe the defense did, but the government kind of pointing back to case law and saying that they're happy to be working with the probation office. I will say that there was a part, this was after the judge had initially denied Sean Combs bail and being able to walk out of the courthouse today. And I did see when Maureen Comey was making these arguments on behalf of the government that Justin Combs was kind of sitting inside the gallery, really kind of shaking his head. So it seems like from the government's point of view, they just want a little more time to get everything in order in terms of having Sean Combs sit down with somebody, I guess, from the probation office to kind of really do an interview. But the government was like, you know what, the statute is clear. The only thing that's exceptional about this defendant is his wealth, the violence, and his brazenness. He's an extremely violent person. He showed no remorse. His brazenness is unmatched. He used prostitutes. He assaulted Jane, and it was not self-defense. And then the government said something that I don't even think we heard at trial, Jesse. The government said that he invited Jane to the hotel room where Sean Combs was ultimately arrested, where he had the drugs, where he had the lighting set up. And then the defense was kind of, I think, a little upset by the government's argument there because Mark Agnifilo said, you know what, listening to Miss Comey makes me appreciate that we have jurors. But either way, at the end of the day, bail is still denied for the defendant. So Sean Combs isn't walking out of that courthouse today. He'll go back to MDC Brooklyn, and then we'll see what happens next at his sentencing hearing, or at another hearing prior to that, but then later.
We'll talk about that. Didn't Mark Agnifilo push back a little bit? Didn't he push back on the judge's decision a little bit? He had some things to say.
A little bit or a lot of it, Jesse? I think it was more kind of a lot of it. So during the defense's argument there, Mark Agnifilo making these arguments, he said, Your Honor sat through this entire trial. As good as, probations are, you sat through this trial. And they were kind of really pushing for an expedited sentencing hearing. They said that they were willing to waive all those interviews with the probation office and all the different services that the defendant, I guess, has to go through. They were willing to do all of that. And it kind of makes sense, right? Because Sean Combs has already spent a year behind bars. If he were to have an expedited sentencing, it's more likely that he wouldn't be spending so much time with a
The moment to leave was no longer a choice but an inevitability. Court officers stood firmly at his sides, waiting for the signal to escort him out. His attorneys leaned in close, speaking in low, serious tones, their faces grim and focused. He cast a final look toward the gallery, his eyes scanning the crowd. Some faces showed sympathy, others remained cold, and a few openly gloated. Without hesitation, he turned toward the side door leading to the holding area. Outside, the crowd surged forward as news of the verdict broke instantly. Phones buzzed with notifications, and social media timelines flooded with updates and clips of his outbursts spreading faster than anyone could track. Opinions poured in. Some hailed it as justice long overdue, while others condemned it as a relentless witch hunt. Yet no one could deny the impact of the moment, which landed like a hammer blow far beyond the courthouse steps. Behind him, Diddy's team followed closely, their expressions unreadable but minds already racing toward damage control. Statements, interviews, and the inevitable media storm looming ahead. As the courthouse doors swung shut, one undeniable truth remained. The man who had entered that morning as a titan in music and business left under the heavy shadow of a sentence that would forever change his legacy. The myth of invincibility was shattered, replaced by the harsh reality of a prison sentence and the uncertain years to come.